And to talk about the patients and their family, tonight we're honored to have the Barnett family. We have Doug and Nichole, patient son Nicholas, and brother Ethan, who are going to come and tell us their story. The Barnett family.
These are our superheroes here. And because of emotions, I decide to read my speeches. I will look up every once in a while, but I hope that you appreciate that as well. I want to thank you for having us here, as this is really the only way that we are able to get back at this time while our son Nicholas is undergoing the rigorous treatments for leukemia. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for being here, because without your support, during fundraisers such as these, our son would not have the opportunity of being treated at the premier hospital in the world, the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It is events like these to support this amazing organization that allows superheroes such as the one standing here beside us to continue to always wear their capes. That said, I would first like to give you a little background about our son and his diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia just 15 short months ago, or long, depending on what side of the table you're on. Our family had been at Lake Springfield for the weekend and spent a wonderful time having some fun in the sun with my girlfriend and her family. When Nicholas woke up that following morning, he had started a low-grade fever, a little diarrhea, as well as some swelling around his eyes, which we thought was pink eye. I thought for sure it had everything to do with him swimming and therefore inhaling a bunch of lake water over the weekend. It stayed with him during that first week, and we had taken him into the doctor's office twice, once to prompt care, and then again at the end of the week to have his stool checked for any signs of bacteria that could have gotten in from the water. Again, I assumed that he was carrying something from the water, as the symptoms of fever and diarrhea would just not go away. Nothing too serious, but just trying to figure out why it was lingering. Then on August 12, 2009, just 10 days from the start of these symptoms, Nicholas woke up with his eyes all swollen and the whites of his eyes completely blood red. He had hemorrhaged into his eyes, and we didn't know why. So I took him back to the doctor's office, and actually we got to see his pediatrician this time, and although she was not terribly concerned, she decided to send us to the local eye clinic for him to be checked out by a professional, and she decided to run a blood test on him. She told me later that it was only on a whim that she decided to do the blood test, as she did not think there was anything seriously wrong with our little boy. So we took him to the local eye clinic, and they verified that he was bleeding in the back of his eyes, but they were not completely sure why. So they scheduled us to see a retinal specialist the following day. We never made that appointment. At about 4:30 p.m. on August 12, 2009, I received the phone call that I will always remember and that forever changed our lives. The call from Dr. Rosa telling me that the blood test came back, and it was bad. It was serious. It was cancer. It was a blow I by no means was prepared to hear, and I bellowed and moaned and yelled for 5 minutes straight before she was able to get through to me that because of Nicholas's presentation, his extremely high white cell count, and his critically low platelet count, as well as the swelling in his eyes, she suspected a neuroblastoma, which is a tumor in the brain. But she was praying for leukemia. Praying for leukemia. I remember clearly when she told me that we needed to get to Peoria, to the St. Jude affiliate, pack a bag, and head that way, get there quickly, but safely. He cannot afford to be in an accident, as his condition is very critical. That was our first experience with the St. Jude Midwest affiliate. What I only knew as OSF in Peoria, where we met my son's pediatric oncologist, Dr. Ross, a very special woman to us. Never in my wildest dreams would I think that my son would have an oncologist. But after a very grim night full of one test after another, he was diagnosed as having T-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, and his condition was critical enough that around midnight, Dr. Ross started making the calls to have Nicholas moved via air ambulance to St. Jude's in Memphis. That process was a lengthy one, which gave my husband Doug time to go home and pack more clothes for the two of us. We didn't know how long we would be there, as well as bring our oldest son Ethan to the hospital the next morning so that he could say his goodbyes. I cannot imagine what was going through Ethan's head as he had to watch his brother being strapped to the stretcher by the two flight nurses, with Nicholas's eyes now completely swollen shut, completely bruised, and his eyes completely blood red. I was a mess, and although it was a blur, I remember standing at the doorway to Nicholas's hospital room with Doug, as well as Dr. Ross. She had given me a book on childhood cancer, some light reading for the flight, and we were speaking with who I thought was a volunteer with St. Jude's. She was giving us pamphlets and maps of the campus in Memphis and telling us a few quick details before we headed out, and through all the haze, I happened to hear her say the following that completely caught my attention. You know, the minute you stepped into St. Jude's, everything is paid for and taken care of, right? I honestly stopped and looked at her and asked her to please repeat what she had just said, and she said it again, word for word. And that is when my husband and I completely broke down and cried. As a mother, all I could think of through that terrible night in Peoria was that my son had cancer and what that means. And I have to admit that periodically I would look around at all the monitors and all the tests that had been done and think fleetingly with a complete sinking feeling in my heart and my chest, how are we going to afford to pay for all of this? But then I would shake my head and continue my vigil of just focusing on Nicholas and nothing more. But the thoughts of financial despair were there until that wonderful woman told us and then repeated again, everything is paid for and taken care of. I cannot say that I completely believed her. I didn't. Nor that the despair and dread that I felt in my every being of my heart and body was lifted. But that was the first inkling of hope that I received with our new connection with the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Nicholas and I made it to Memphis in just around an hour, private ambulance and jet to and from hospitals, both hospitals, and then somehow we found ourselves in the intensive care unit at St. Jude's in Memphis, Tennessee. It was surreal, a blur, and I was in a complete haze. Nicholas spent 3 long days in ICU as the team of doctors with the leading leukemia doctor in the nation and around the world, Dr. Ching Han Pui, at the helm, worked to stabilize his condition and confirm his diagnosis, ALL precursor T. Chemotherapy was started almost immediately once his condition was stabilized, and we were then moved to the second floor for a few days before being discharged and spending the final 8 weeks of the first phase of treatment called induction at the local Ronald McDonald House. Yes, 8 weeks. And those 56 some odd days were the biggest roller coaster of my life, especially the first 29. The amount of time it took Dr. Pui and his team to bring my little boy into remission, ridding his little body of the leukemia that had infiltrated his bones, his blood, as well as his spinal fluid. Since our joyous return home in October 2009, Nicholas continues to receive weekly chemotherapy treatments, as well as monthly procedures, including spinal taps and bone marrow aspirations, traveling between the Midwest affiliate in Peoria and the main campus in Memphis. In fact, I'm happy to report that Nicholas is the first standard high-risk patient of Dr. Pui's to complete 2 very hard rounds of chemotherapy called Reinduction 1 and Reinduction 2, locally in Peoria. Normally, these patients are sent back down to Memphis for 4 to 6 weeks to complete each of these phases of treatment. But with the facility that we are blessed to have virtually in our backyard, we had the privilege of having most of these 2 long phases completed at home. Nicholas is now 48 weeks of 120 weeks into the final phase of treatment called maintenance. As I said, he continues to receive weekly chemotherapy treatments, but things have started to level out for him and for us as a family since the doses of chemo are at a lower dose and more regular. We are very excited that he has entered school this year as a first grader at Hudson Elementary School, able to do some of the normal things that children his age would normally get to do. His body was hit so hard over the first 12 months, and I'm so grateful that he has come so far. That is not to say that he is through the woods, as he has 72 more weeks of treatment to endure with weekly chemotherapy treatments in Peoria, as well as 2 to 3 day trips down to Memphis every other month. The final treatment for this superhero should be in March 2012, around the time of his 8th birthday, and I can tell you, we are going to throw one hell of a party. What does St. Jude mean to me? I have been asked this question several times, and I can never seem to find the right words to describe my range of emotions when I think of this extraordinary organization. All that I can say with full gusto is that this hospital, with Dr. Pui in the lead and Dr. Ross at our local affiliate, as well as the wonderful doctors and nurses that we have come in contact with, is the reason why our superhero is with us here today, period. No questions in my mind. On August 12, 2009, Dr. Rosa called me with the worst news of my life, but she already knew where Nicholas needed to go without a single question in her mind. She had already contacted Dr. Ross in Peoria before she contacted me, and they had already called down to Memphis to let them know what was going on. It was all set up without questions on our end, knowing that he was in the only place that he needed to be, and they worked to save my young son's life. I have been asked to be a guest speaker at a few St. Jude events in the past, and as my family was getting ready for one in particular, my oldest son started complaining about having to go, and Nicholas started chiming in that he didn't want to go either. So I sat them down together, turned off all distractions, and told them straight up and honestly where our family would be if it were not for St. Jude's. Without St. Jude's paying for all of our medical bills, and I mean all, 100%, including all the treatments done in Memphis, which is not covered through our insurance, as well as travel expenses for Nicholas and I to and from Memphis, we would not be living the same as we normally do. I lost my job after 4 weeks down south while holding my son's hand during the toughest battle of his life, and our budget at the time had us living up to our means, the American dream. Well, with the loss of my job without St. Jude's, we would have had to sell our house, sell off our second vehicle, and live in a sea of medical debt. St. Jude's literally saved what we know of our lives. We were able to still live in our home, our comfort zone, and with some rearranging of our expenses, as well as me recently going back to work full-time, we were able to continue our lives past diagnosis in a way financially that we would not have been able to do otherwise. If you've never had the opportunity to visit the main hospital in Memphis or the wonderful new clinic at the Midwest affiliate in Peoria, you should make the trip so that you can see firsthand these exceptional facilities full of the best doctors and nurses in the world. St. Jude's is an amazing place and is by donations only that allow them to keep their doors open to children just like my son, to bring them from diagnosis to remission to full cure. This is my prayer each and every night, remission to cure. What does St. Jude's mean to me? All I can say that I have made the decision to devote my life to this wonderful organization, to raise money and awareness, to continue to give our children hope for a bright and healthy future, children just like Nicholas. I'd like to leave you with a poem that was seemingly written completely for our 6-year-old superhero. Actually, it's the lyrics of the song, The Cape. When I was first directed to this link by a friend, I cried as I read the lyrics because they describe Nicholas to a T, and they are as follows. 8 years old with a flour sack cape tied all around his neck, he climbed up on that garage, figuring, what the heck. He screwed his courage up so tight, the whole thing came unwound. He got a running start, and bless his heart, he headed for the ground. He's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath. Always wear your cape. All grown up with a flour sack cape tied all around his dreams, he was full of spit and vinegar. He was full of spit and vinegar. He was busting at the seams. He licked his finger and he checked the wind. It was going to be do or die. He wasn't scared of nothing, boys. He was pretty sure he could fly. He's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath. Always trust your cape. I know without a doubt that Nicholas will live out every one of his fantastic dreams, as will his superhero of a brother, and we have all learned to always trust our cape. Thank you.
Well, he's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath, and always trust your cape.